Roger! The voice calling his name was so utterly unexpected that it made him jump. Eyes wide with surprise, he turned around and found Freddie, who had stopped just a few feet away, a little out of breath. Roger glanced back over his shoulder at the handful of people who had also turned curiously to look and moved further away from the bus stop. They instinctively moved into the doorway of an office building and out of people's way. "How'd you know I was here?" Roger asked, taking a last drag from his cigarette and flicking it aside. "I didn't," Freddie replied with a small shrug and shivered as the wind picked up. I just figured." It wasn't until then that Roger really took in the sight of him and realized that not only was he still only wearing his flimsy t-shirt, but his bare feet were poking out from beneath his bell-bottom trousers. Roger raised his eyebrows. "What the hell happened to your shoes?" Freddie shuffled awkwardly, lifting one foot off the ground and wiping it on his trouser leg. "There wasn't any time," he said quietly, and then shook his head. "Roger, I'm so sorry." Roger averted his eyes, biting his lip, because there stood Freddie, his cheeks and the tip of his nose flushed from the chill, shivering and barefoot with a pained, guilt-ridden look on his face. And even though Roger was sure that only half a minute ago he'd been terribly upset with him, furious in fact, he knew in that moment that he was ready to forgive him. Anything. Unconditionally. Immediately. "What for?" he asked, hands on his hips, trying to look as though he wasn't seconds away from throwing his arms around Freddie and never letting him go. "Everything," Freddie sighed, running a hand over his hair. "I'm sorry about what happened with your flatmates. It's just awful, and I can't stand that it's because of me. You're right. It is my fault, I know it is, and I can't stand that because it's only going to get worse and you will hate me. You will hate me, and I can't bear it. The thought of you hating me, I simply can't." Freddie was fighting back tears. Roger couldn't take it. "Come here," he whispered and closed the distance, pulling him into a firm embrace. Freddie felt cold against him, cold and small, without his shoes, and Roger held him tighter, pressing his cheek to the top of his head. "I was mean to you, I'm sorry." Freddie gingerly rested his head against his shoulder, hugging him back. "I'm sorry too." Roger closed his eyes, painfully aware that he should let go, and soon, because the last thing they needed right now was to draw unwelcome attention to themselves, but he just couldn't bring himself to do it. "It's not your fault," he murmured quietly into Freddie's hair. "And I could never hate you. Freddie, how can I hate you?" He drew a shuddering breath. "I love you." And there it was. Roger felt his stomach flip, terrified of what he had just done, and at the same time, strangely relieved. Freddie let go of him and drew back, a pair of astonished, almond-shaped eyes looking up at him from beneath dark lashes. Roger met his gaze, his heart in his throat. "Do you mean it?" Freddie whispered. "What kind of a stupid question is that?" Roger looked away and gave a weak, nervous laugh. "Obviously I mean it." "I love you too," Freddie said softly and solemnly, and Roger's heart filled with such a warmth that it set his very soul alight. He looked back up and met the other man's gaze. Freddie's eyes shone. There was a smile forming on his lips, lighting up his features, and Roger returned the same smile, until they were standing before each other, all but grinning, amazed and no longer aware of the cold, the rain, and the people hurrying by.